Good day to you. Joshua here. Are you having a good day today? I hope that you are. The big thing coming up for us this week is that the kids are going back to school. If you're not from around here, if you're watching this and you're not from Lawrence County, half the kids are going back on Monday, Tuesday, and then nobody's going on Wednesday, and then the other half is going Thursday, Friday. Or you have the option to do full virtual if you want to do that. So that's the big thing happening in the world around us this week. Go with me to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13. Specifically, we're going to be looking at verses 44 and 45. Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 and 45. Before we get there, let's look at the context. Let's look at what all has happened before we get here. This is a scene where Jesus is teaching mainly in parables. You start in the beginning of chapter 13, you have the parable of the sower. And then you go down to verse 10 and we read why Jesus speaks in parables, why he uses stories to talk to people. Then you go down to verse 18. It's interesting because Jesus rarely explains his parables. He just says them and people understand what he's saying. Here in verse 18, he explains the parable of the sower. Then you go down to verse 24, you get to the parable of the weeds. Then you get down to verse 31 and he speaks some more, the mustard seed and the leaven. In verse 34, it says that, going to verse 35, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundations of the world. So here Jesus is fulfilling the prophecy that he would speak in parables. And here again, in verse 36, it's interesting that he does it twice in 2 chapters, but he explains the parable of the weeds. And that gets us to where we're going to be today. In verse 44. Matthew chapter 13, verse 44 and 45. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had, and he bought it. So here Jesus says that, first off, this man is going about his everyday business, I guess. I don't know what he's doing in this field that he doesn't own, but he's in this field and he finds a treasure in the field. And then he covers it up. He doesn't want anyone else to see it. And when he does that, he goes out and sells all of his possessions. And then he goes back and buys the field with the treasure in it. And then something very similar, you keep on going down. The merchant is searching for pearls, and he finds one of great value. And then he went and sold everything that he has, and he bought the pearl. Now, when I look at the first man, verse 44, he seemed pretty content with life. He wasn't searching for anything. He wasn't looking for anything. He seems pretty comfortable. And he just stumbles across this treasure in this field. I'm thinking of fields beside my parents' house and how I would walk them and look for arrowheads and, was perfectly content with what I was doing. But here, he finds this treasure. And I see him maybe frantically trying to put dirt over it, dig a hole and put it in it, and keeping it to himself and keeping it a secret. And then he goes out and he finds whoever owns this land. And the guy tells him the price. So he goes home and he sells everything that he has and he buys this field. And when he buys the field, he gets the treasure that is in it. And I think some people, like he was very content. He wasn't searching. And I think some people are very content with life, even though they don't know the treasure that is found in knowing Jesus. But some people just stumble across him. I think of my mother, who was raised in a denomination, and she was content and she was happy. And then she found my father, and they just kind of stumbled across each other. And they started dating and they got married. And then my mother became a Christian. She wasn't looking, but through my father, she just kind of stumbled across Jesus and she found this treasure. And you go down something different between that and verse 45. It says the merchant in search of fine pearls. So he wasn't content. He wasn't satisfied where he was. He was looking for pearls. And it's interesting that, where Israel is, you have Israel and then you have the Mediterranean Sea. So pearls were around, but pearls weren't very common. Actually, one of the most valuable things you could have in Bible times was not gold. It wasn't silk. These things were valuable. But one of the most valuable things was a pearl, because it was very, very rare to have a pearl in Israel. So this man is searching for pearls. And I'm sure he's in markets and he's in stores and he's looking around and he sees it. He sees this pearl that he wants. And he says, I got to have it. So again, he goes home and sells everything that he has and comes back and he has this pearl. Now, what does it mean that they sold everything? For me to sell everything, I think about my clothes. I have ball shorts and t-shirts and even suits and boots and tennis shoes. I think of selling all of my clothes, all of that stuff that I have. And then I think of things like my fishing gear. I like to fish. So, I've saved up money and bought fishing gear and lures and tackle. And those things I love because I love to fish. And whatever his hobby was, whatever thing he loved to do, he sold all of that stuff. I think of me fishing or selling all of my fishing gear. And I think of the books that I have, the commentaries and all those things that I read and I spend time in. Me selling everything would mean that I sell those. And then I think of the appliances that are in my house. I have a washer and a dryer and a dishwasher and TVs and, we have lamps and we have furniture, we have couches and beds. And I think of the process of selling all of those things in our house. Appliances and furniture and curtains and lamps and everything. And then I think of my car. I use my car every day to come to the office or to go visit people or just to do normal things. That would be included in my everything. So I don't know if he had livestock. I don't know what he had. Then I think of I rent right now, but I think of my parents owning a house and how they built their house, and they spent months working on the house and making the house just as they wanted it. And I think, them selling their house for this treasure found in this field or this one little pearl. Now go with me, keeping that thought of selling everything that you have. Go with me right below that. We'll start in verse 47. Matthew chapter 13, verse 47, and we'll go down through verses 50. Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. And when it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good in containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This parable seems so out of place for me. We go from finding treasure or finding a pearl to a net being thrown into the sea and fish being pulled out and keeping the good ones and throwing away the bad ones. And then Jesus says, the angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why does he transition from finding treasure, finding Jesus, finding salvation, to, sorting people out, sorting the good from the bad? I think it's the preface of, then in his joy, he goes out and sells all that he has. He went out and sold all that he had and bought it. I think as Christians, or even non-Christians, I've seen lots of non-Christians find Jesus Christ, find treasure in him, and find salvation, and know what he is and who he is and what he's about. But they're not willing to give up things of this life. They're not willing to put things below Jesus. They're not willing to not physically sell things off, but to put things on the back burner to Jesus. Whether it be relationships, I think parents keep people from coming to Christ sometimes. I think spouses keep people from coming to Christ sometimes, or friends. And I think as Christians, those who know the treasure and see the treasure and see the pearl and have it, I sometimes struggle with putting Jesus over everything else. I use my fishing stuff as an example. I like to fish. It's just one of those things. And if it come down to it, between like my books and my commentaries and things that I need, or the fishing stuff, I would like to say that would be an easy decision, but it wouldn't be. So for me, I need to do better in knowing the treasure and knowing how valuable Jesus Christ is in my life. My challenge for us this week is to look at all of our stuff, to look at our relationships, to look at anything, our hobbies, our children, our spouses, and I want us to evaluate how important that stuff is to us. And then I think we should evaluate how important Jesus Christ is to us. And my second challenge for us this week is to read through the rest of this chapter. So to go to verse 51 and go all the way to verse 58. I think there's some great stuff to learn from the rest of this chapter. So, my question for us today is, have you found the treasure? Have you found the pearl that you've been searching for? I would say that most people watching this are Christians, so we have. We know who Jesus is, and we know the treasure that comes with knowing Him and having His forgiveness and His grace and having salvation through Him. At this point in our lives, would we sell everything we had? Would we give up everything that we had for Him, to have Him in our lives? And that's my thought for today. If you're not coming back, we miss you. I miss you. I offer this every time. But give me a call if you're If you're just wanting to talk to somebody, if you hadn't been back and hadn't seen anybody from church, just call me. But anyways, we love you, and we hope you have a great day.